Ornea's sun beat down on Snoop Dogg's Long Beach studio, its golden rays filtering through the blinds and casting striped shadows across the mixing console. Calvin Broadus Jr., known to the world as Snoop Dogg, leaned back in his chair, eyes closed, letting the bass-heavy beat wash over him. The track was nearly perfect, but something was missing. A certain element that would elevate it from good to legendary. His phone buzzed, breaking his concentration, and he glanced down to see a message from a number he hadn't seen in years. Kanye West. Been thinking about the old days. Let's talk. I'm in LA next week, the message read, simple yet loaded with significance. Snoop's eyebrows rose in surprise. Their relationship had been complicated at best, antagonistic at worst, especially after their very public disagreements over politics, music, and lifestyle choices. Tension between them had grown into a chasm that seemed impossible to bridge, with each man standing firmly on opposite shores of hip-hop philosophy. Yet here was Kanye, reaching out after all this time. "Yo, what do you think?" Snoop asked his producer, who had been watching his expression change. "You wants to meet up, after everything that went down?" He trailed off, remembering the heated exchanges, the social media posts, the interviews where they'd taken shots at each other. The producer shrugged, his face a mixture of caution and curiosity. "Could be interesting, could be a disaster. But when have you ever backed down from either?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Snoop tapped his long fingers against the armrest, weighing the potential benefits against the risks. A collaboration with Kanye, despite their differences, could be groundbreaking. Two icons from different worlds of hip-hop, bridging the gap that had formed between them and within the culture itself. But it could also reignite old tensions, create new conflicts, and potentially damage the peace he'd worked hard to cultivate in his life and career. The decision wasn't just about music, it was about legacy, respect, and perhaps even forgiveness. Don't miss what happens next. Hit that subscribe button right now to follow this incredible journey between two hip-hop legends. Drop a like if you're excited to see what unfolds when these titans meet. "Tell him I'm down," Snoop finally replied, the decision made. Next, Tuesday. My studio. He set the phone down with a sense of finality, uncertain whether he was opening a door to reconciliation or stepping into a minefield. The producer nodded approvingly, already imagining the possibilities of what could come from this unlikely reunion. Snoop turned back to the track, but his mind was elsewhere, replaying moments from their shared history, wondering what Kanye truly wanted after all this time. The news spread quickly through their inner circles, hushed whispers of a potential meeting between two of hip-hop's most influential figures. Speculation ran wild. Was this about music, business, or personal matters? Both artists had evolved dramatically over the years, taking different paths that seemed to diverge more with each passing day. Snoop had embraced his elder statesman status in the industry, becoming a beloved cultural icon who transcended music, while Kanye had continued to reinvent himself, courting controversy and pushing boundaries in ways that often left the public and his peers bewildered. As Tuesday approached, Snoop found himself unexpectedly nervous, a feeling he rarely experienced anymore. He had the studio cleared of unnecessary personnel, wanting the space to be neutral ground where honest conversation could happen. He arranged for good food, good drink, and most importantly, a good sound system. Music had always been their common language, even when words failed. If they were going to rebuild any kind of bridge, it would start with the beats and rhymes that had defined both their lives. The hours before the meeting were filled with preparation, both practical and mental. Snoop reflected on the journey they'd both taken since their early days, the different roads they'd traveled to arrive at this moment. Despite everything that had happened, there was still respect there. Respect for Kanye's production genius, his willingness to challenge norms, his unapologetic approach to creativity. Perhaps that was the foundation they could build upon, a mutual recognition of what each had contributed to the culture they both loved so deeply. Outside the studio, fans and paparazzi had begun to gather, somehow aware that something significant was about to happen. Security kept them at bay, but the energy was palpable, a mixture of excitement, skepticism, and hope. Inside, Snoop lit up, the familiar ritual helping to calm his nerves as he waited for the arrival that could change everything. The clock ticked closer to the appointed hour, and with each minute, the weight of history and possibility grew heavier in the room. At precisely 3 p.m., a sleek black SUV pulled up outside, and security moved into position. The moment had arrived. Snoop stood up, straightened his clothes, and took a deep breath. Whatever happened next would be more than just a meeting between two artists. It would be a collision of worlds, a potential healing of wounds that had been festering in hip-hop culture for too long. The door opened, and Kanye West stepped into the studio, his expression unreadable but his presence undeniable. The stage was set for a conversation that would indeed leave fans in awe. The atmosphere in the studio crackled with tension as Kanye stood in the doorway, his silhouette backlit by the afternoon sun. He looked different from the last time Snoop had seen him, more grounded somehow, less frenetic energy, and more focused presence. The two men regarded each other across the room, decades of shared history and separate journeys hanging in the space between them. It was Snoop who broke the silence first, his languid drawl cutting through the tension like a knife through butter. "Long time no see, yeah. Welcome to the LBC." Kanye nodded, stepping fully into the room and letting the door close behind him. "Appreciate you taking the meeting, Snoop. Not everyone would." His voice was quiet but firm, carrying none of the bombastic quality that had defined many of his public appearances. He moved further into the studio, taking in the environment, the platinum records on the walls, the state-of-the-art equipment, the lingering scent of weed that seemed to follow Snoop wherever he went. This was undeniably Snoop's territory, yet Kanye showed no signs of discomfort. "So what's this about?" Snoop asked, gesturing for Kanye to take a seat on one of the plush couches. "Your message wasn't exactly detailed." He remained standing, maintaining the subtle power dynamic of host versus guest. Kanye sat down, his hands clasped together, eyes focused on Snoop with an intensity that had become his trademark. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he began, "about the state of hip-hop, about the divisions, about the legacy we're all building or destroying." The words hung heavy in the air between them. Snoop raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite his initial skepticism. He'd heard Kanye make grand pronouncements before, had watched from a distance as the younger artist cycled through phases and personas at a dizzying rate. But there was something different in his tone today. A humility, perhaps, or at least a recognition that he wasn't the only architect of the culture. "And," Snoop prompted, finally taking a seat across from Kanye, curious to hear where this was going. "What conclusion did all this thinking lead you to?" If you're loving this unexpected reunion so far, make sure to hit that like button. The conversation is just heating up, and you won't want to miss what these legends have to say to each other. Comment below with what you think is about to happen next. "That we're stronger together than apart," Kanye replied, his gaze unwavering. "That the beefs, the disagreements, the public shots, they might make for good headlines, but they're tearing at the fabric of what we built. I'm not saying we need to agree on everything, but the respect has to remain intact." He paused, seemingly searching for the right words. "I've made mistakes, Snoop. Said things in the heat of the moment, made choices that affected more than just me. I'm not here to apologize for my beliefs, but for how I've expressed them sometimes." Snoop listened, his face impassive but his mind racing. This was not the conversation he had expected to have. He had prepared for business talk, for tentative discussions about potential collaborations, perhaps even for another round of the ideological debates that had driven them apart. He hadn't prepared for what appeared to be a genuine attempt at reconciliation. "That's surprisingly self-aware coming from you, yeah," he finally said, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "But I appreciate the sentiment. Been doing some reflecting myself." The ice broken, they began to talk more freely, memories of their earlier days in the industry flowing naturally into the conversation. They reminisced about tours, award shows, studio sessions where magic had happened, moments before the complications of fame and diverging paths had created the gulf between them. Laughter occasionally punctuated the conversation, genuine and unrehearsed, as they recounted stories that only they could truly understand. The shared history began to reassert itself, reminding both men of the foundation that had never completely crumbled. As the conversation deepened, they moved from the past to the present, discussing the current state of hip-hop with the insight that only veterans could provide. They found common ground in their concerns about the commercialization of the genre, the emphasis on image over substance, the disposable nature of much of today's music. "These kids don't know their history," Snoop lamented, shaking his head. "They're making music in a vacuum, no connection to what came before." Kanye nodded in agreement, his eyes lighting up with the passion that had always driven his best work. They began to map out the concept in more detail, their complementary knowledge of the industry creating a more robust plan with each passing minute. Snoop's extensive network and respected elder status would open doors that might remain closed to Kanye alone, while Kanye's visionary approach to presentation and documentation would elevate the project beyond a simple gathering of legends. The energy in the room shifted from the reflective mood of their earlier conversation to something more electric, the creative spark that happens when two great minds find synchronicity. "That's why we need to show them," Kanye said, leaning forward, his energy building. "Not just tell them, show them. Create something that bridges generations, that reminds everyone where this all came from while pushing it forward." The idea hung in the air, tantalizing in its possibilities. Snoop found himself nodding, his producer's mind already spinning with potential directions, beats, collaborators. Despite their differences, the creative connection was still there, perhaps stronger for having been tested by time and conflict. The conversation shifted to their personal lives, areas they had rarely discussed even in better times. Kanye spoke of his struggles with mental health, his spiritual journey, the lessons learned from public missteps. Snoop shared his own evolution, from gangsta rapper to cultural ambassador, the growth that had come with age and fatherhood. There was a vulnerability in this exchange that surprised them both, a willingness to see each other as complete human beings rather than the caricatures that media narratives had often reduced them to. The studio, which had felt so charged with tension when Kanye first arrived, now felt like a sanctuary where honesty was not only possible, but welcome. Hours passed unnoticed as they talked, occasionally playing snippets of works in progress, giving each other the feedback that only a peer of equal stature could provide. The criticism was constructive, the praise genuine, the exchange of ideas flowing naturally, as if the years of distance had never happened. Staff came and went, bringing food and drinks, their eyes wide with the realization that they were witnessing something historic. Outside, the crowd of fans and photographers had grown, word having spread that both Snoop and Kanye were inside the studio together. As evening fell, casting long shadows through the windows, they finally addressed the elephant. In the room, what came next? This meeting had exceeded both their expectations, opening doors neither had been sure could be unlocked again. "So," Snoop said, his voice casual but his eyes serious, "where do we go from here? Yeah. This conversation's been real. But what happens when we step back into the world?" It was the question that would determine whether this day was merely a pleasant anomaly or the beginning of something truly significant for both their careers and for hip-hop culture as a whole. Kanye leaned back, his eyes reflecting the studio, lights as he considered Snoop's question. The easy camaraderie of the past few hours had created a space where possibilities seemed limitless, but they both knew the outside world was more complicated. "I have a proposition," Kanye finally said, his voice taking on the confident tone that had marked his rise to fame. Something bigger than just squashing beef or doing a single track together. Something that could change the narrative not just for us, but for the culture. Snoop tilted his head, intrigued. If there was one thing Kanye had never lacked, it was vision, sometimes to his detriment, but often to revolutionary effect. "I'm listening," Snoop replied, his curiosity piqued by the intensity in Kanye's expression. Whatever this idea was, it clearly mattered deeply to the younger artist. And after the genuine connection they'd re-established today, Snoop was inclined to at least hear him out. He reached for another blunt, lighting it as he settled in for what promised to be an interesting proposal. "A summit," Kanye began, his hands moving expressively as the concept took shape in the air between them. "Not just any summit, a gathering of the architects, the founders, the game changers. You, me, Jay, Nas, Eminem, Dre, Diddy, the Wu-Tang, generals, Queen Latifah, Missy, Lauryn Hill, everyone who shaped the sound and soul of hip-hop across generations, not for a concert or an award show, but for real conversation, recorded and shared with the world. His eyes were alight with the fire that had produced five-star albums and headline-grabbing controversies in equal measure. Snoop exhaled a cloud of smoke, considering the scale of what Kanye was suggesting. It was ambitious, potentially groundbreaking, and fraught with logistical and interpersonal challenges. Many of the artists Kanye had named had their own complicated histories with each other, grievances both public and private, that had never been fully resolved. "That's a lot of egos in one room, yeah," Snoop observed, though his tone wasn't dismissive. "A lot of old wounds that might get reopened. What makes you think people would agree to this?" "This is getting intense. If you're excited about this epic summit idea, smash that like button and subscribe to see how this unfolds. Drop a comment with which hip-hop legend you'd most want to see at this historic gathering." "Because it's necessary," Kanye replied without hesitation. "The culture is fractured, Snoop. The new generation doesn't understand the foundations, and the old guard is scattered, fighting separate battles instead of standing together. Look at what happened today. You and I found common ground despite everything that's happened. Imagine what could happen if we all came together, not to pretend the differences don't exist, but to show how to navigate them with respect and purpose." The passion in Kanye's voice was contagious, and Snoop found himself nodding slowly, imagining the possibilities. A true council of hip-hop elders, sharing wisdom, addressing conflicts, building bridges across regional, stylistic, and generational divides. It was the kind of legacy-defining event that came along once in a lifetime. "And where would this happen?" Snoop asked, his mind already racing ahead to practical considerations. "Neutral ground would be key. Can't be NY, can't be LA, can't be Chicago or Atlanta. Too much history in all those places." Kanye smiled clearly, having anticipated the question. "Wyoming," he said simply. "My ranch. Isolated, private, no distractions, no territorial advantages. Just mountains, sky, and truth." He leaned forward, his intensity building. "We record everything, the conversations, the inevitable studio sessions that would happen, the meals, the downtime. Not for some reality show exploitation, but as a historical document. The definitive oral history of hip-hop, created by the people who lived it." Snoop whistled low, impressed despite himself. The concept was bold, potentially revolutionary, and exactly the kind of grand vision that had made Kanye both a genius and a lightning rod for controversy. "And you think people would set aside their differences, their schedules, their pride, to make this happen?" he asked, though he was already mentally listing who he could personally convince to participate. The idea had taken root, its potential too significant to dismiss. "Not for me," Kanye admitted with surprising humility. "Not for any one person, but for the culture? For the chance to set the record straight, to shape the narrative instead of letting others define our legacy? For the opportunity to heal wounds that have been festering for decades? Yes, I think they would." He paused, fixing Snoop with a direct gaze. "Especially if you and I lead the way. Show that reconciliation is possible, that the common ground is worth finding." The implications were clear. This would require Snoop and Kanye to publicly embrace their renewed connection, to stand together as the first example of what the summit could achieve. It was a risk for both of them, opening them to scrutiny, skepticism, and potentially backlash from fans who had chosen sides in their previous conflicts. But as Snoop considered it, he recognized the power of the statement it would make, the doors it could open for others to follow their example. "We'd need to approach this carefully," Snoop said, shifting from skepticism to strategy. "Start with the ones most likely to say yes. Build momentum. Make it something people don't want to miss out on. And we'd need to address the business side. Up front. Rights, distribution, compensation. These are artists who've been exploited before, who've learned to protect their interests." Kanye nodded in agreement, clearly pleased that Snoop was engaging with the idea as a potential reality, rather than a pipe dream. As midnight approached, they had the bones of a plan. A tentative date 6 months in the future, a list of essential participants prioritized by likelihood of participation, and a shared understanding of the narrative they would present to the world. "This could be revolutionary," Snoop acknowledged, no longer hiding his enthusiasm for the concept. "If, and it's a big if, we can get the right people in that room, willing to speak their truth and listen to others." Kanye's smile was both satisfied and determined. "That's where we start tomorrow," he said, the word "we" cementing their new partnership. Together. "I came here hoping for a conversation, maybe a collaboration. I'm leaving with a mission." He extended his hand across the space between them, a gesture both professional and deeply personal given their history. Snoop took it without hesitation, the handshake sealing more than just a business arrangement. It represented a healing that many had thought impossible, a new chapter in a story that had defined modern music. Morning light streamed through the windows of Snoop's home studio, where he and Kanye had reconvened after a few hours of sleep. The energy between them had shifted overnight, from the tentative reconnection of their initial meeting to the focused determination of collaborators with a shared vision. Laptops, notebooks, and whiteboards now covered the space, evidence of their late-night planning session and the work that had continued from the moment they'd arrived today. The summit idea had evolved from concept to concrete plan, with a growing list of potential participants, logistical considerations, and strategic approaches. "The announcement needs to be perfect," Kanye insisted, pacing the length of the studio as Snoop reviewed their draft statement. "Not just the words, but the timing, the platform, the visuals. Everything has to communicate that this isn't just another industry event. This is a historical corrective, a cultural realignment." His perfectionism, often mocked by critics, but respected by collaborators, was on full display as he scrutinized every aspect of their rollout strategy. Snoop, more laid back but equally invested, provided the counterbalance needed to keep the planning grounded in reality. "The key is authenticity," Snoop replied, making notes in the margins of the document. "People can smell fakeness a mile away, especially in hip-hop. If this comes across as manufactured or commercially driven, it's dead before it starts." He looked up at Kanye, his expression serious. "That means we need to be honest about our own journey, the beef, the reconciliation, the purpose behind this summit. No sanitized version of events. The truth, good and bad, is what gives this power." Kanye nodded in agreement, recognizing the wisdom in Snoop's approach. They had decided on a two-phase announcement. First, a joint interview revealing their reconciliation and the genesis of the summit idea, followed by a more formal press release, detailing the event itself once key participants had confirmed. The question now was which platform would host that first conversation. It needed to be respected enough to give the announcement weight, independent enough to allow them control over the narrative, and accessible enough to reach both hardcore hip-hop fans and the broader cultural audience they hope to impact. Can you believe how this project is coming together? If you're excited to see this hip-hop summit become reality, hit that subscribe button now. Don't forget to like this video and comment below with which artists you think will join Snoop and Kanye in Wyoming. "What about Drink Champs?" Snoop suggested, referring to the popular podcast hosted by NORE and DJ EFN. "It's respected in the culture, the format allows for deep conversation, and NORE has relationships with both of us." He pulled up recent episodes on his phone, noting the impressive roster of guests and the candid nature of the discussions. Plus, it would be a statement in itself. Two artists with our history, sitting together, breaking bread and breaking news. The symbolism wasn't lost on either of them. Kanye considered it, his expression thoughtful. "I like it," he finally said. "But with conditions. We need final approval on the edit, a guarantee of minimum runtime, and no pre-release clips that might distort the message." His caution was understandable given his history with media misrepresentation, and Snoop readily agreed to the terms. They made the call together, speaking to NORE on speakerphone, the host's excitement audible as they outlined what they wanted to do. The recording was set for the following day, an accelerated timeline that reflected both men's desire to maintain momentum. With the first phase of the announcement in place, they turned their attention to the more challenging task of securing key participants for the summit itself. They divided the list between them based on personal relationships and likelihood of positive reception. "I'll take Jay, Nas, and Pharrell," Kanye said, making notes on his tablet. "You handle Dre, Eminem, and the West Coast legends." Snoop nodded, already composing messages in his head for each potential participant. The outreach would need to be personal, addressing specific histories and concerns, tailored to each artist's perspective on the culture and their place within it. As they worked through the logistics, their assistants and team members filtered in and out of the studio, executing tasks and bringing updates. Word had already begun to spread through the industry grapevine that something significant was brewing between Snoop and Kanye, generating speculation and interest. Their phones buzzed constantly with messages from curious friends, colleagues, and media contacts, all sensing that a major announcement was imminent. They remained deliberately vague in their responses, wanting to control the narrative when the time came. By late afternoon, they had finalized the Drink Champs appearance details, drafted personalized outreach messages for their initial list of summit invitees, and sketched out a rough production plan for the event itself. The Wyoming ranch would need significant preparation to host such a gathering. Accommodations, studio facilities, security, and support staff all had to be arranged. Kanye had already dispatched his team to begin the assessment, confident that the remote location could be transformed into the perfect setting for the historic meeting of minds they envisioned. "There's one more thing we need to consider," Snoop said as they reviewed their progress. "Music." The word hung between them, laden with potential. Not just talking about it, but making it. If we're bringing these legends together, something's going to happen in the studio. We should be prepared to capture it, produce it, release it as part of this whole experience. Kanye's eyes lit up at the suggestion, his mind already racing with possibilities for what could be a landmark collaborative album featuring the architects of multiple hip-hop eras. A sonic document to accompany the visual and verbal one, Kanye mused, excitement building in his voice. Not forced collaborations, but organic creations that emerge from the conversations, from being in that space together. He began sketching concepts for mobile recording setups that could be placed throughout the ranch, allowing for spontaneous sessions wherever inspiration struck. This could be the most important hip-hop album ever made, Snoop. Not because of who's on it, but because of why and how it came to be. The scope of the project continued to expand as their creative energies fed off each other. Yet the core purpose remained clear: to heal divisions within hip-hop culture, to bridge generational gaps, to reclaim the narrative of the art form from those who had never lived it. What had begun as a simple meeting between two estranged artists had evolved into a potential watershed moment for an entire cultural movement. The weight of this responsibility was not lost on either man, but rather than feeling burdened by it, they seemed energized, focused, and surprisingly united in their vision. As evening approached, they prepared to go their separate ways until the Drink Champs recording the next day. Standing in the driveway of Snoop's compound, they looked at each other with a new understanding and respect. "You know people are going to be skeptical," Snoop said, addressing the inevitable public reaction to their sudden reconciliation and ambitious plans. "They're going to say it's a publicity stunt, a money grab, or that it won't last." His tone wasn't worried, merely acknowledging the reality they would face. Kanye nodded, unusually serene in the face of potential criticism. "Let them talk," he replied. "The work will speak for itself." He extended his hand once more, but Snoop bypassed it, pulling him into a brief but genuine embrace instead. The gesture, captured by security cameras but not by paparazzi, was perhaps the most significant moment of the day, a physical manifestation of the bridge that had been rebuilt between them. As Kanye's SUV pulled away, Snoop stood watching, already mentally preparing for the next day's announcement that would send shockwaves through the music world and beyond. The Drink Champs episode featuring Snoop Dogg and Kanye West dropped at midnight, and by sunrise, it had broken all previous viewing records for the platform. The internet exploded with reactions, clips from the 3-hour conversation spreading across social media like wildfire. The sight of the two legends sitting side by side, sharing drinks and stories, addressing their past conflicts with honesty and their future plans with passion, had captured the attention of not just hip-hop fans but the broader cultural landscape. Snoop Ye Summit trended worldwide, with reactions ranging from enthusiastic support to skeptical questioning to outright disbelief. In the episode, they had laid out their vision for the Wyoming summit with the perfect balance of ambition and humility. They spoke of healing divisions, preserving hip-hop history directly from its creators, and creating new pathways for intergenerational collaboration. They were candid about their own journey, the mutual respect that had soured into public discord, the miscommunications and genuine ideological differences, and the recognition that their individual influences on the culture were stronger when aligned rather than opposed. The authenticity of their reconciliation was palpable, even to the most cynical viewers. Snoop scrolled through his phone as he sipped his morning coffee, taking in the avalanche of responses. Texts and calls had been pouring in since the episode aired, colleagues expressing support, media requesting interviews, and most importantly, several artists from their initial outreach list responding positively to the summit concept. "Dre's in," he texted Kanye. A significant early win given Dr. Dre's legendary status and notoriously selective participation. Says he wants to bring some of his new artists too, bridge that generation gap we talked about. Across town, Kanye was in a similar state of constant communication, fielding responses and managing the growing interest in their project. "Jay just called," he replied to Snoop's message. "He's cautiously interested, wants more details on the format and goals. Not a yes yet, but definitely not a no." This was perhaps the most crucial early response. Jay-Z's participation would lend immense credibility to the summit and potentially influence other East Coast legends who might be hesitant. The chess pieces were moving into place, slowly but steadily. This is getting real. The legends are responding. If you're as excited as we are about this historic gathering, make sure you're subscribed to see what happens next. Like this video and comment below with your reaction to Snoop and Kanye's announcement. The industry reaction was swift and multifaceted. Record executives recognized the commercial potential of such a gathering and began reaching out with offers of distribution deals, documentary rights, and exclusive streaming arrangements. Snoop and Kanye had anticipated this and agreed to table all business discussions until the creative and cultural foundations of the summit were secured. This wasn't about making money, though both were savvy enough to know it would, but about making history, about correcting the narrative of hip-hop culture by bringing together its primary sources. What they hadn't fully anticipated was the reaction from the younger generation of artists. Within hours of the announcement, their respective teams were fielding calls and messages from current chart toppers and rising stars, all expressing interest in participating or at least attending the summit. The hunger for connection to the roots of the culture was apparent, contradicting the common narrative that today's artists had no respect for those who had paved the way. Kanye and Snoop discussed this development during their midday check-in call, recognizing both the opportunity and the challenge it presented. "We need to find a way to include them without diluting the core purpose," Snoop mused, genuinely pleased by the younger artists' enthusiasm, but protective of the summit's integrity. "Maybe a second phase, after the founders have had their time to connect? A passing of the torch type of moment?" Kanye agreed, suggesting a structure where the established legends would have 3 days of closed-door sessions, followed by 2 days where selected representatives of the new generation would join the conversation, creating a living document of hip-hop's evolution across decades. As media coverage expanded beyond music publications to mainstream news outlets, the summit began to take on cultural significance beyond their initial expectations. Commentators framed it as a potential healing moment, not just for hip-hop, but for American culture more broadly, noting how the planned gathering of diverse voices from across regional, stylistic, and ideological spectrums represented a model for constructive dialogue in polarized times. The reconciliation between Snoop and Kanye themselves was held up as an example of finding common ground, despite significant differences. By evening, they had confirmed participation from 12 major artists, with another 15 in various stages of discussion. The momentum was building faster than they had dared hope, driven by the authentic passion they had displayed in the Drink Champs interview and the obvious cultural importance of what they were proposing. Their teams were now working at full capacity, coordinating logistics, drafting formal invitations, and beginning the complex process of scheduling a gathering of some of the busiest and most in-demand individuals in entertainment. Amid the whirlwind of activity, Snoop received an unexpected call from Martha Stewart, his unlikely friend and business partner. "Calvin," she said, using his real name as she always did, "I've been watching all this unfold today and I want to help. Let me handle the hospitality for your summit, accommodations, meals, the comforts that will let everyone focus on the important conversations." Her offer was both practical and symbolic, representing the kind of cross-cultural connection that hip-hop had always fostered at its best. breaking down barriers between worlds that seemed impossibly distant. Kanye, meanwhile, was deep in conversation with his architectural team, transforming his vision for the physical space of the summit into detailed plans. The Wyoming ranch would be reconfigured to create multiple environments for different types of interaction. Formal discussion spaces equipped with high-quality recording equipment, casual lounges for organic conversation, state-of-the-art studio, facilities for musical collaboration, and private retreats where participants could reflect and recharge. Every aspect was designed to facilitate honesty, creativity, and connection, the physical manifestation of the summit's goals. As day turned to night, both men found themselves reflecting on the magnitude of what they had set in motion. What had begun as a tentative reconciliation between two estranged artists had catalyzed what promised to be a defining moment in hip-hop history. The responsibility was enormous, but so was the potential impact. In their separate spaces, miles apart but united in purpose, they felt a similar sense of rightness, of being exactly where they needed to be, doing exactly what needed to be done, for the culture that had shaped their lives and that they had, in turn, helped to shape. The last text of the day came from Snoop to Kanye. Simple but loaded with meaning. "We really doing this, huh?" The response came quickly. "History in the making. No turning back now." As they both settled into sleep after the most eventful day either had experienced in years, the wheels they had set in motion continued to turn, rippling outward through the industry, the culture, and beyond. The summit was no longer just an idea or a plan. It was becoming a movement, a moment in time that promised to realign the fractured narratives of one of the most influential cultural forces of the modern era.